invented children. Of course, God makes them. He knits them together in their mother's womb. That would be Psalm 139, Rexella. But that was not my question. Specifically, who invented the modern concept of children? How we treat them, how we esteem them, how we interact with them. Might I suggest to you, it was Christianity that changed the way society views children. So what does that have to do with the price of tea in Texas on a Tuesday? A lot, as society appears to be desiring to kick Christianity to the curb and no longer follow the rules of that antiquated faith in that 2,000-year-old book. I would like to suggest to you, especially if you're not a Christian, you're going to miss us. Why? Because there are so many things in our culture that we take for granted today that actually came about exclusively because of the Christian faith. And that is precisely what this article, written by a guy whose name I wager I'm going to say wrong, so you just read it for yourself. He makes the case that the concept of childbearing and raising children is radically different today than it was when the pagans were in charge. Here's what he had to say. We have forgotten just how deep a cultural revolution Christianity wrought. There are many ideas that we simply take for granted as natural and obvious when in fact they didn't exist until the arrival of Christianity changed things completely. Take, for instance, the idea of children. Today, it is simply taken for granted that the innocence and vulnerability of children makes them beings of particular value and entitled to particular care. That is quite a claim. That today, our culture views children. We have Chuck E. Cheese's today because of Christianity. Let me take that back because that maybe isn't such a good thing. The point is, children today are treated the way they are. We pour money into education because we want them to all have a head start, because we look at children a particular way. But history, as always, doesn't happen in an instant. It happens throughout time. And before Christianity was the pervasive influence in Western culture, kids were not treated so hot. Let's go back to Mr. Pascal. Our culture encourages us to let ourselves fall prey to our gooey feelings whenever we look at baby pictures. Oh, they're so good. What could be more natural? In fact, this view of children is a historical oddity. If you disagree, just go back to the view of children that prevailed in Europe's ancient pagan world. As the historian O.M. Baki points out in his invaluable book, When Children Became People. In ancient Greece and Rome, children were considered non-persons. Now, this is just history. This is the reality. Prior to Jesus Christ walking this earth, throughout Greek and Roman civilization, children were not even, they were like this table. In fact, this table might have been more valued and valuable to human beings because, well, this was more utilitarian. This served a purpose, and it didn't cost anything to keep it alive. Children, on the other hand, wow, the energy and the work that has to go into feeding those little mouths, and they cry and they make messes, and they can't even work in the fields until they're older. And so it was, the pagan view of children in the Greek and Roman world, they esteemed children to be about as valuable as, well, as women. But we'll tackle that next time on Wretched. Back to Mr. Pascal. Back then, the entire social worldview was undergirded by a universally held, if implicit view. Society was organized, this is huge, in concentric circles, with the circle at the center containing the highest value people, and the people in the outside circles having little to no value. At the center was the freeborn adult male, and other persons were valued depending on how similar they were to the freeborn adult male. Such was the lot of foreigners, slaves, women, and there they are, children. And you know what that means, don't you? That means I get to write on the chalkboard with my marker. Why is this so important that we have this fixed into our noggins? Because we have a tendency to think that history was basically always this way. The way that the political process happens, the way that we are transported around, the way that society was structured and viewed different human beings, we kind of assume, well, it was always this way, wasn't it? And the answer to that question is absolutely not. Let me suggest to you that there are two ways that human beings were viewed in Greek and Roman culture. The first way is the one that you just heard about, that it was basically concentric circles. So here is, not bad if I don't mind saying so myself. In the center of society were the most important people. And who were they? Surprise, not women and children, because when it's not a culture that is influenced predominantly by women and children, always in the center of everything are the free men. In this, most important, they're free, they're, if you will, back in the day, these were the white Christian males of Greece and Rome. Outside of this particular circle of power and esteem would be concentric circles, and it would be measured based on how much do they look like the free man, not socioeconomic status, but how much do they look like the free man? And so outside of this, and I suspect that there were some variances based on different scenarios, there would be rings going out. And so you would have outside of this perhaps foreigners who were free and who did some very fine rock and roll music in the late 70s and early 80s. By the way, Lou Gramm is supposed to be a believer. At any rate, Lou Gramm and Foreigner was outside of the free men. And then outside of that, you would have maybe other rings, but predominantly then women. And then way out here would be children. That is how society viewed children. They were as far away from being a free man as possible. However, I would like to suggest to you there was another way, we need to remember this, that culture would view human beings. I did not know that geometry would be involved in this job. Think of society as a pyramid. And at the very top, you would have, for instance, royalty, very few people, and they would be very, very rich. And a fewer people that were underneath the top of our little Alan Parsons pyramid would be people who happened to be wealthy. So they would be landowners, they would be business owners. These would be people who had some cash. But these two top tiers, very few people. Underneath this would be basically like this. Poor people. You talk about a socioeconomic divide. These people were poor, and you say, well, who was lower, who was poorer than the poor people? This is what we would call, and this is basically a Greek term. This would be the poor. These are groveling beggars. This, by the way, is the type of poor that Jesus talked about. Blessed are the poor, the groveling poor in spirit. I need your mercy, I need your help, I can't get any lower. That is the type of heart that God seeks and saves. And that was the lowest individual on the rung of society. Therefore, if you fell down here, varying levels, or you were out here, you were not treated so spanky. You didn't have your picture taken on the red carpet. And so it is, this is the culture that we see happening before Jesus Christ walked this earth, before Christianity started to spread. And when it did, it changed this and it changed that forever.